What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to another video. Today we are jumping back into our 2012 draft class rankings. If you guys have watched my videos in the past, I did a full quarterback ranking of this draft class. It was an amazing quarterback class, so entertaining. Did a whole long video on it, really cool video. So check that out if you guys haven't already. Then I also made a running back draft class ranking. And it's been a minute because we got busy, doing videos for the 2025 draft that was currently happening. But now that we're done and it's settled down a little bit, I wanted to go through and rank all these wide receivers that got drafted in this class. There was 31 wide receivers either drafted, in the 7 rounds, some notable undrafted free agents, and then also a player that had a special case as well, which we'll get there when we get there. But yeah, let's hop into these rankings. Now, obviously, I was not going to do all 31 slides for all 31 receivers because a lot of these guys, didn't do too much in the NFL. So I kind of broke down 31 through 21, just like this. We'll kind of go through this really quick. So in the parentheses, whenever I do these draft class rankings, if you watched in the past, I'll say where they should have went, or where they should go if there was a redraft or anything. If teams could go back, this is where they would go, and then their diagnosis. So a lot of these guys would go undrafted just based off of what they accomplished in the NFL, and all of them are busts because a lot of these guys were either drafted in the early rounds or just drafted in general. If you should go undrafted in another draft, then you're going to be a bust, unfortunately. So we have Jeremy Ebert, Jordan White, Devon Wiley, Tony Clemens, AJ Jenkins, Jerron Kreiner, Junior Hemingway, and then guys I would say could go like towards the end of the draft in the 7th round, like literally towards the end of the draft: Devere Posey, TJ Graham, Levon Brazil, and Nick Toon. Now the only guy that I actually know from this list is Nick Toon, who's pictured there at the bottom, just from those mid-2010 Saints days. But let me know if you guys recognize any of these other names. If they were on your favorite team or whatever, if you remember these guys. Always fun to have a little blast from the past with some random NFL players, right? But without further ado, let's hop into number 20 here with Ryan Broyles. He was the 54th overall pick by Detroit out of Oklahoma. And over his 3-year career, he had 32 catches for 420 smoke-em yards and 2 receiving touchdowns. In a redraft, I believe he'd go in the 7th round as well, unfortunately making him a bust with him going in the 2nd round to the Lions. At number 19, we have Keyshawn Martin, who was the 121st overall pick by the Texans out of Michigan State. Over his 5-year career, he had 62 catches for 685 yards and 5 receiving touchdowns. However, he did add value as a returner. He was a very good punt returner in the NFL. Pretty decent. I think he had a punt return touchdown in his career. So I didn't include that in the stats, but that is where he adds value. So I put him, in a redraft going in the 6th round. Unfortunately, still making him a bust to like a decent pick going in the 4th round. But I would think, drafting a guy like that in the 4th round, you'd want a little bit more in the receiving end. But still a decent pick. Coming in at number 18, we have Stephen Hill, another 2nd rounder, 43rd overall by the Jets out of Georgia Tech. He only lasted in the NFL for 2 seasons, and in those 2 seasons, he had 45 catches, 594 receiving yards, and 4 receiving touchdowns. In a redraft, I believe he'd go in the 6th round. He was decent for those 2 seasons, but obviously he didn't last too long, and that unfortunately makes him a bust going in the 2nd round of this draft. Coming in at number 17, we have a name that I recognized when I went through here, Josh Bellamy, who was actually undrafted. Signed by the Kansas City Chiefs coming into the NFL in 2012 out of Louisville. And over his 8-season career, he carved out a decent role. 78 catches for 1,019 receiving yards and 5 receiving touchdowns. In a redraft, I think he would for sure get drafted going in the 6th round, which obviously makes him a steal, being undrafted. Going into your, anytime a person's undrafted and able to carve out a decent career, an 8-season career, that's really impressive. So I guess like when I was doing research for this video, I guess Josh Bellamy is he got arrested or something on like fraud. I don't know, wire fraud or something. So doesn't sound like he's doing too good right now, but you know, he had a pretty good career for being undrafted. Coming in at number 16, we have the highest drafted receiver in this class, and that's going to be Justin Blackmon, who was drafted 5th overall by the Jacksonville Jaguars out of Oklahoma State. Actually had a really good rookie year. He was obviously on the PFWA All-Rookie team. I think he had like 900 receiving yards in his rookie year. Then it trailed off in the second year. He had a lot of shit going on, drugs and or alcohol. I don't remember what it was, but keeping him out of the NFL just ruined his career. 93 catches for 1,280 yards and 6 touchdowns over his only 2 seasons in the NFL. And in a redraft, I think just for that rookie year, you know, teams might use a 6th-round pick on him, a late 6th-round pick, 7th-round pick, but obviously that makes him a bust. Going 5th overall, only lasted 2 seasons, unfortunately, and almost looks unrecognizable right now. I hope he's doing okay. But yeah, RIP Justin Blackmon's career. Yeah, it's unfortunate. Hope he's doing all right. Hope he's living the best life he can. Coming in at number 15, we have another name that I recognize from those St. Louis Rams days, Brian Quick out of Appalachian State, drafted 33rd overall, so the first pick in the second round by the St. Louis Rams. And in his 7-season career, he had 114 catches, 1,600 receiving yards, and 10 receiving touchdowns. In a redraft, you know, he was a decent wide receiver 3. You know, on a redraft, I'd say he'd go in the 6th round. But that does make him a bust, unfortunately. You know, even though he was a name I recognized, carved out a decent career, 7-season career, still went in the 2nd round. So I do think he is a bust. Coming in at number 14, we have Chris Givens, another St. Louis Ram. He was drafted 4th round, 96th overall by the Rams out of Wake Forest. And in his 4-season career, he had 107 catches for 1,800 receiving yards, 5 receiving touchdowns, and as you know, just like his draft mate Brian Quick, I have him going in the 6th round, which is a bust or a decent pick. You know, being drafted in the 4th round there, but he only lasted 4 seasons. You know, you hope you get a little bit more out of that if you're drafting a guy in the 4th round. You know, decent. I'd say 4th round to me, like in the NFL draft, if I'm drafting a receiver in the 4th round, you know, I'm obviously you're always drafting for them to be a star, but at least you're looking for a guy who can be your wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 for 5+ seasons, right? Or someone who's consistent for a couple seasons. Chris Givens, I believe, spent 3 seasons with the Rams, and then he did spend a little time with the Ravens, and then got signed to the Eagles practice squad and was out of the NFL. Coming in at number 13, we have Jarius Wright. He was drafted 118th overall in the 4th round by the Vikings out of Arkansas. And over his 8-season career, you know, he had carved out a decent career. He had 224 catches on 2,800 receiving yards, 11 receiving touchdowns. And, you know, in a redraft, I think he's a good, you know, late 5th round pick, maybe mid to late 5th round pick, making him a decent pick. He was drafted, I believe, towards the bottom of the 4th round. So, you know, kind of right where they drafted him at. You know, makes him a decent pick. And Jarius Wright is one of those random names that is nostalgic for me because I remember I got a pack of cards, of football cards at like Target or something when I was a kid. And it was probably, I think it was like 2013, 2014. It was close to when he got drafted. And I remember I got a card that it was a signed Jarius Wright card. And I thought it was the coolest thing ever because he was an NFL player and whatnot. Didn't really know who he was, but I knew he was an NFL player, so I thought it was really cool, and I'll always remember him for that. Coming in at number 12, we have Ruben Randall. He was drafted 63rd overall by the Giants out of LSU. And over his 4-season career, he had 188 catches, 2,600 receiving yards, 20 receiving touchdowns. However, in a redraft, I think he'd go in the 4th round, making him a bust with that 2nd-round pick. You know, talent or a decent pick. You know, border, like I said, some of these guys that I put as a bust, you know, you could put bust / decent pick. But I do think they were hoping to get more than 4 seasons out of him. You know, that's kind of the main thing. But in those 4 seasons, you know, he was pretty decent. So Ruben Randall comes in here at number 12. And this was the LSU receiver the Giants drafted before they got OBJ. And coming in at number 11, we have Kendall Wright, drafted 20th overall by the Tennessee Titans in the first round. So we have another first-round receiver here. And I remember Kendall Wright from those early days of being an NFL fan. He came out of Baylor, and over his 6-season career, he had 339 catches, 3,900 receiving yards, and 19 receiving touchdowns. He did have a 1,000 yard season with the Titans, which any receiver who can do that with the Titans, that's pretty damn impressive. Calvin Ridley just did that this past season. So, there is that. In a redraft, I think he'd go in the third round, however, just because he only lasted 6 seasons. And he had 1,000-yard season, and then, the other seasons were a little rocky. So, unfortunately, I think that makes him a bust going in the first round. They didn't really get that superstar, that star talent out of him that they were really, really hoping for. But, still carved out a decent career. And like I said, anyone who can put up 1,000 yards on the Titans, that's pretty damn impressive. That's something to put on your resume. And kicking off our top 10, we have Rashard Matthews, who was drafted in the 7th round, 227th overall, so towards the bottom of the draft by the Miami Dolphins out of Nevada. Over his 7-season career, he had 230 catches on 3,200 receiving yards and 21 receiving touchdowns. And in a redraft, I think he goes in the 3rd round easily. Very reliable receiver, good wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3. In his career, played for the Dolphins and the Titans. And I think that makes him an absolute steal. I mean, getting drafted in the 7th round, able to carve out a very good 7-season career. Very, very big steal here. And had a good career. Coming in at number 9, a name that brings me back, Travis Benjamin, drafted with the 100th overall pick in the 4th round by the Cleveland Browns out of Miami. And he, in his 9-season career, which he spent with the Browns, Chargers, and 49ers, he had 208 catches on 3,100 receiving yards and 19 receiving touchdowns. Added so much value as well, though, as a returner. Very good returner. And the Browns' best receiver there for like 1 or 2 years. In a redraft, I think he goes in the 3rd round with the value he brings as not only a receiver, but also as a returner, like I was saying. And that makes him a great pick. He was drafted in the 4th round. I gave him a 3rd round grade. Great pick for the Browns there in the 4th round. But yeah, Travis Benjamin, definitely a name that takes me back. He was like the only bright spot on those Browns teams in the late 2010s, mid 2010s. He was a bright spot for them for sure, and played pretty well for the Chargers as well. Coming in at number 8, we have Jermaine Kearse, who went undrafted, signed by the Seattle Seahawks, the hometown Seattle Seahawks. He came out of Washington. In his 7-season career, he had 255 catches on 3,300 receiving yards, 17 receiving touchdowns. He was a Super Bowl champion when they won Super Bowl 48. Absolutely blew the Broncos out of the water. I believe he spent a season or 2 with the Jets towards the end of his career, but for the most part, he was a Seattle Seahawk, and a big Seattle Seahawk from those Super Bowl caliber teams. When they lost Super Bowl 49, he had that insane catch that put them in that situation for that interception. I mean, obviously everyone talks about the Malcolm Butler interception, how crazy that was, but the catch that Jermaine Kearse made, they wouldn't even been in the situation to debate if they could run the ball or pass it, because Jermaine Kearse made an absolute insane catch to put them there. And then the only reason they were even in the Super Bowl was because Jermaine Kearse made that insane. That wasn't an insane. It was a very good catch. He held on through contact in that overtime win against the Packers, the comeback win in the NFC Championship. Jermaine Kearse had so many good moments with the Seahawks. Such a pivot, such a big piece of those teams, and a lot of Seahawks fans will agree with me. He was just a big part of those teams, and a lot of Seahawks fans will love this guy. So redraft, I think he go in the 3rd round. His wide receiver 2 for those years in Seattle, and very reliable. And I think that makes him a steal. Obviously, this dude went undrafted and carved out very fun and nice career in Seattle. So yeah. Coming in at number 7, we have Michael Floyd, who was drafted 13th overall by the Cardinals. He was the 2nd receiver taken out of Notre Dame. And in his 7-season career, he had 266 catches on about 4,000 yards and 25 receiving touchdowns. He was a Super Bowl champion. I actually think it was with the Broncos, because I was just as surprised as you were. Actually, I'm sorry, he was never on the Broncos. It was with the Patriots a year later, Super Bowl 51. Yeah. Yeah, I believe it was, when the Patriots came back against the Falcons, the 28-3, that's when he got his ring. So he did get a ring in his career, which is awesome. And he was a reliable receiver for Carson Palmer. He was a reliable receiver for the Cardinals. He never really panned out to that first round grade, but he was still a reliable receiver in the NFL. And I think it makes him a decent pick. You could say a bust, but I think just for how reliable he was, he was never bad or anything. I think it makes him a decent pick. Coming in at number 6, we have Mohamed Sanu, who was drafted in the 3rd round, 83rd overall by the Bengals out of Rutgers. And in his 10-season career, he had 435 catches for 4,900 receiving yards and 27 receiving touchdowns. In a redraft, I think he goes in the 3rd round, which is where he went, and I think it makes him a good pick. Drafted by the Bengals, spent a lot of time with the Falcons. He was such a good wide receiver too, behind Julio Jones, and reliable target for Matt Ryan. Just had a really good receiver body. A big body receiver, athletic, even could throw the ball. He had some fun plays where he was throwing the ball to Matt Ryan or whatever. So, great career that he was able to carve out. Good, reliable receiver. And, it was a good pick, obviously, going in the 3rd round. Kicking off our top 5, we have Cole Beasley, another undrafted player. He was signed by the Cowboys out of Southern Michigan. And in his 11-season career, he had 556 catches for 5,700 receiving yards and 34 receiving touchdowns. He was a second-team All-Pro. And you know what? I probably should have done some research on this. I think that was when he was with the Bengals the Bills. And he had like almost 1,000 receiving yards. Or it could have been him as a returner. I'm not really too sure. But he was a second-team All-Pro, which is awesome. And in a redraft, I think he would easily go in the 3rd round. Such a reliable slot receiver throughout his NFL career. Great target for Josh Allen in Buffalo. Great target in Dallas. And, carved out a really nice career as an undrafted player. Such a good slot receiver. I think he'd easily go in the 3rd round, making him an absolute steal going undrafted just because of his size. And you see that a lot with these guys. But he was able to carve out a very, 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 very good career. And coming in at number 4, we have Josh Gordon. The legend of Josh Gordon, man. It's really sad looking back on it, in my opinion, because Josh Gordon was, when he was at his height, when he was, playing as good as he was towards the beginning of his career, he was one of the best receivers in the NFL, top 3. He was a receiving yards leader, All-Pro first team. He was a Super Bowl champion. That was probably with the Patriots as well. And he was a Pro Bowler. But those first 3 seasons of his career, he had a 1,600 receiving yard season. Just incredible. When this guy was at the height of his game, he was better than anyone on this list. Better than the 3 guys that were in front of him. But obviously his career fell off. It's sad in my opinion, especially because it was... marijuana. It was because of marijuana why he was getting indefinitely suspended from the NFL like 3 different times because of marijuana, which is now legal. It's just so funny to me. You have players who are beating their wives, beating their kids, and still playing in the NFL, but this guy couldn't fucking play because he was smoking weed. It's the stupidest thing ever. Josh Gordon, such a talented receiver. Sad finish to his career, but you can't forget those days in Cleveland when he was first in the NFL. This dude was a monster. So anyways, getting back into his profile here. So he was drafted in the supplemental draft by the Cleveland Browns. And what that is, I kind of had to do some research on it because I kind of forgot what that even is. Basically, I'm assuming the weed, if a player is not eligible or is eligible to be drafted but can't be in the draft for some reason because they're suspended or have something going on outside of the sport, or off the field, I should say, they're able to go into what's called a supplemental draft, which is in the summer, after the draft that's in the spring. And basically, teams will bid on these players if they really want them, and they'll bid like rounds, if that makes sense. So he was drafted in the second round of the supplemental draft, and what that means is the Browns said, we will use a second round pick on this guy. And what happens is when they say that, so whatever teams goes higher. So if a team said we'll use a first round pick, then I don't really know what happens if multiple teams say they'll use a first round pick. I don't really know what happens there. But basically, what happens is the team that has the highest round that they're giving up has to give up that pick the next season. So the Browns didn't have a second round pick, or didn't have their own second round pick at least, in the next draft because they wanted to draft Josh Gordon in the supplemental draft. I hope that makes sense, or it might just sound like I'm talking out my ass. But basically, they forfeited a second round pick to pick this guy, and I think it was completely worth it, even for those first 3 seasons coming out of Baylor. And in his 8-season career, we're putting quotes around that, or it says 8 seasons. It wasn't a full 8 seasons by any means. He had 252 catches on 4,300 receiving yards and 21 receiving touchdowns. We went through his awards, all pro first team though, and he's the only guy on this list to do that. Spoiler alert. And in a redraft, like I said, even for those, just for those first 3 years, he's a second round pick. I mean, when he was at his best, this dude was the only good thing the Browns had in the past, however many years you want to say, right? Making him obviously a great pick. Yeah. RIP Josh Gordon's career, like I said, it's really sad. Somebody can make a video on this guy's career easily, and maybe I will, but it's just unfortunate that led to his demise. It's the stupidest thing ever, in my opinion. Coming in at number 3, we have Marvin Jones, who was drafted in the 5th round, 166th overall by the Bengals. The Bengals did a great job of drafting receivers in this draft that didn't actually play for them but had great careers. Out of Cal, and in his 11th season career, he had 547 catches on 7,400 receiving yards and 58 receiving touchdowns. In a redraft, I think he'd go in the 2nd round easily, making him a steal. He was a 1,000-yard receiver with the Lions. Had a great receiver tandem with Kenny Golladay for those couple years in Detroit. And yeah, carved out a really nice career in the NFL, spent some time with Jacksonville. And you could make a case that he could be above the guy at number 2, but Marvin Jones had a great career and very dependable receiver. But coming in at number 2, we have Alshon Jeffrey, who, like I said, you could say Marvin Jones had a better career, but I think Alshon Jeffrey, had more playoff experience and played well in the playoffs, had really big plays in the Super Bowl that they won, that the Eagles won, Super Bowl 52. He was a big piece of that. And I think he stepped up where it mattered most, where Marvin Jones didn't really have that opportunity with the teams he played with, unfortunately. But anyways, he was drafted 45th overall by the Bears out of South Carolina. And in his 9-season career, he had 475 catches on 6,800 receiving yards and 46 receiving touchdowns. He was a Super Bowl champion. He was a Pro Bowler. And in a redraft, I think he would go in the late 1st round, maybe the early 2nd round. Making him a great pick, right where they picked him at, basically a little bit above. So great pick for the Bears, and had a great career for the Bears and the Eagles. But coming in at number 1, we have none other than our boy T.Y. Hilton himself, drafted in the 3rd round, 92nd overall by the Colts out of Florida International. Whoever did the scouting there, perfect, hit it right on the money. 638 catches for 9,800 receiving yards and 53 receiving touchdowns over his 11-season career. He was a receiving yards leader. He was a four-time Pro Bowler, a part of the PFWA All-Rookie team with Justin Blackmon. And in a redraft, I think he's easily a top 10 pick. Just with the career that he had, multiple 1,000-yard seasons, such a dependable target for Andrew Luck, who was his draft mate in this draft. And it just makes him an absolute steal. T.Y. Hilton had a great career. Spent a little time with the Cowboys towards the end, but he'll always be a Colt in my eyes. And yeah. Guys, let me know if you guys liked the video. Leave a thumbs up if you liked it, and subscribe if you guys like this type of content. I appreciate you guys watching. I think I'm going to do a redraft, a full 1st round redraft of the 2012 draft to cap off this little throwback that we have going on this year. And if you guys haven't watched my other videos, I did say that every offseason I'm going to be doing this, but doing a different draft. So next offseason, we're going to be doing the absolute garbage 2013 NFL draft, which I think will be kind of fun. There's going to be a lot of players that I completely forgot about just because I know that draft is very weak. But I think it'll be a lot of fun. But yeah, stay tuned for that redraft video. And once again, I appreciate all the support. I'll see you guys in the next one. Later.